I want to share something with you today. Not a lesson, not a strategy, not a step-by-step guide, but a story. A story I've never fully told before. A story about fear, money, exhaustion, and the moment my entire life changed. Because I didn't grow up thinking financial freedom was possible for someone like me. I grew up thinking money was something you chased and never caught. I grew up thinking life was about responsibility, not choices. And for a long time, I accepted that. Until one moment shattered everything I believed. For years, I lived inside a routine that drained me. Wake up early, rush to work, come home tired, check my bank account with a little hope and a lot of fear. Bills, rent, food, responsibilities. They always came before me. I wasn't living. I was surviving. I remember one night in particular. I was sitting on my bed, laptop open, staring at my online banking. I had worked the entire month, overtime included, and still the numbers didn't add up. That night, I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just felt numb. The kind of numbness that happens when you finally admit you're lost. I whispered to myself, is this really my life? Is this all there is? And somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice answered, unless you change something. Yes, a true story that changed me. A few days later, something happened that I will never forget. I was at a small local cafe, the type with shaky wooden tables and the smell of roasted coffee beans hanging in the air. Across from me sat my friend Min, someone I had known since we were teenagers. Min had grown up poor, really poor. His parents worked long hours. He worked part-time through school. He never had much. But that day, he looked different. There was a calmness in him, a confidence I had never seen before. I asked him, "How are things?" He smiled and said something I didn't expect. "I just bought my first small apartment." My jaw literally dropped. "How? You? With your salary?" He laughed, not offended at all. Then he said something that burned itself into my mind. I stopped telling myself I was too poor to save or invest. I started with what I had, not what I wished I had. He told me how he had started saving tiny amounts every week. He learned basic investing from free online videos. He built a small freelance income on the side, nothing big, just enough to grow slowly. And he stuck with it, day after day, year after year. No shortcuts, no miracles, just consistent progress. When he finished talking, I felt something inside me shift, like someone had quietly opened a door I never knew existed. That night, still thinking about Min, I read a story online about a man named James Clear, now a well-known author. Before he became successful, he wrote one article per week. No audience, no fame, no big opportunities, just small steps repeated until they built something huge. The pattern was everywhere. People didn't win because they started big. They won because they started small and didn't stop. And in that moment, I realized something life-changing. Financial freedom isn't a dream. It's a direction, a decision, a series of tiny actions repeated until they become a different life. I remember closing my laptop, sitting there in silence, heart pounding and thinking, if Min can do it, if others can do it, why not me? That was the moment I realized financial freedom wasn't for the lucky, it was for the determined. The first step that changed my life. People think transformation begins with something complicated. Mine didn't. My first step was embarrassingly simple. I tracked my spending for 30 days, and I realized something painful but freeing. I wasn't bad with money. I was just blind to it. I started saving a little, sometimes only a few dollars. I learned one digital skill. I found a side income that slowly, quietly grew. I invested tiny amounts, not enough to brag about, but enough to shift my mindset. I treated financial freedom like a plant. Water a little every day. Months passed, then a year, then two. And one morning, something extraordinary happened. I checked my bank account and felt calm. No fear, no tightness in my chest, no panic. For the first time, I had a cushion, a foundation, a new kind of safety, a future. That was the real beginning of my financial freedom. Not money itself, but the moment I realized I was no longer controlled by it. I didn't start with wealth. I didn't start with confidence. I didn't start with skills or knowledge. I started with frustration, with fear, with exhaustion, with the simple wish for a better life. Maybe you're in that place right now. Maybe you feel stuck, tired, overwhelmed, unsure of how to begin. If that's you, hear me when I say this. Your life can look completely different a year from now if you take one small step today. Financial freedom isn't about how much you earn. It's about how much you grow, how much you learn, how consistently you move forward. You don't need permission. You don't need the perfect moment. You don't need more luck. You just need to choose to begin. Maybe, just maybe, this is your moment. The moment your life quietly changes forever, the same way mine did, in the most unexpected way. Your future self is waiting. Your freedom is waiting. Your new life is waiting. Start small, start scared, start imperfect. Just start. Because one day, you'll look back and whisper to yourself, that was the moment everything changed. When life started to respond to my efforts. The strange thing about taking control of your financial life is this. Life begins to respond differently. A few months after I started changing my habits, opportunities that once felt invisible began appearing. One day, my manager approached me unexpectedly and said, "We've noticed your improvement. Would you consider taking on more responsibility?" A year earlier, I would have said no. I would have doubted myself, feared the stress, feared the change. But now, something inside me had shifted. I felt grounded, not by confidence, but by clarity. I said yes. That small promotion didn't just raise my income, it raised my belief in what was possible. It was as if the universe had been waiting for me to take myself seriously before it took me seriously. I once read a quote, "When you change the story you tell yourself, the world changes the way it responds to you." And for the first time, I understood exactly what that meant. But let me tell you something honestly. Growth isn't a straight line. There were days when I slipped back into old habits. Days when unexpected expenses wiped out what I had saved. Days when I felt like maybe I wasn't meant for this financial freedom journey after all. There was one night I remember clearly. I had just paid for a sudden medical bill, and half of my savings, months of effort, disappeared in a single moment. I sat on my kitchen floor, exhausted, telling myself, maybe you were foolish to think you could do this. But then I remembered Min, my friend who had told me I wasn't richer, I was more patient. And I realized something important. Every person who builds freedom hits moments that test their commitment. The difference between those who make it and those who don't is persistence. So instead of giving up, I rebuilt, dollar by dollar, habit by habit, day by day. And here's the beautiful part. Every setback made me stronger, not weaker. Every challenge taught me something I needed for the next stage of my life. People think financial freedom is only about money, but the truth is, it changes every part of your life. It changed how I walked into a room. It changed how I made decisions. It changed the way I saw my future. And most importantly, it changed what I believed about myself. I remember a morning not long ago. I woke up before my alarm, sunlight spilling through the window. I made coffee slowly, not rushing, not anxious, not overwhelmed. And I realized this feeling, this calm, this peace, this is what financial freedom actually feels like. Not luxury, not millions, not expensive things. Just peace, just choice, just the ability to breathe without fear. And in that moment, I thanked my younger self, the version of me who was scared, confused, tired, but still chose to begin. Because that small version of me built the life I am living now. There comes a moment in every journey when you suddenly realize you've become someone you never imagined you could be. For me, that moment happened on an ordinary afternoon. I walked into a small bookstore, something I used to avoid because I felt guilty spending money on myself. But this time, as I browsed the shelves, I felt something new growing inside me. Freedom. No guilt, no anxiety, no fear of choosing something I couldn't afford. I picked up a book about personal development, not because I was desperate for answers like before, but because I wanted to grow, not survive. When I went to pay, the cashier smiled and said, "Looks like you're investing in yourself." And without thinking, I replied, "I've learned that's the best investment." As I walked out, I realized something incredible. The person who used to panic at the sight of a small purchase was gone. In that quiet moment, I whispered to myself, "You're changing, and you're not going back." When you grow, people notice, even if you don't realize it. One evening, my younger cousin messaged me. She was stressed, overwhelmed by work, and worried about money, just like I used to be. She asked me, "How did you stop being afraid of the future?" I froze for a moment. No one had ever asked me that before. We ended up talking for over 2 hours. I told her everything. The nights I felt lost, the mistakes I made, the small steps I started with, and how long it really took. She cried. And then she said something that shook me. "You make me believe it's possible for me too." In that moment, I understood something profound. Freedom grows when you share it. Strength multiplies when you give it away. Helping her reminded me of how far I had come, and how many people feel the same fear I once felt. That night, I promised myself that if my journey could help even one person feel less alone, then none of my struggles were wasted. A few months later, I visited the apartment my friend Min had bought, the same friend who had sparked my transformation. We sat on his small balcony overlooking the city lights. He handed me a cup of tea and said, "You look different, happier, lighter." I laughed. "I feel different. I feel free." We talked about life, about mistakes, about the fear we both used to carry. And as we sat there, I felt grateful, deeply, overwhelmingly grateful. Not because everything was perfect, not because I was rich, but because I finally understood that freedom isn't something you reach, it's something you build every day. Before I left, Min looked at me and said, "You know, someday you should share your story. People need to hear it." I smiled. "I think I will." And now, as you're listening to this, I guess I finally did. Because maybe you're where I once was. Maybe you're tired, overwhelmed, unsure, scared of the future. And if that's you, hear this clearly. Your story is not over. Your future is not fixed. And your freedom is not impossible. You're just one decision away from a completely different life.